Welcome to episode 7 of Rob's Career Gems. Today, I'm going to actually talk about a couple of things that sometimes hold us back in our career. And this comes from Liz Wiseman, who wrote the book Impact Players a few years ago. And these practices can sometimes stall us out for a very long time. One of the greatest dangers facing you and facing me in my career is staying in our own lane. We're generally hired to do certain jobs, or if you are an entrepreneur, you have a mission or a niche, a need that you are filling, services or products that people demand. And sometimes we tend to stay tracked into what we think would be our job or our particular span or scope of work. And inadvertently, that can limit us. That can actually prevent us from using more of our creative energy and drawing on more of our strengths to do something even better or something even greater. And so staying in the lane can be very, very difficult. The first move I ever made in my career was when I chose to leave the phone company and join PeopleSoft, the startup business that eventually became my home for the next 11 years of my career. And the reason why I decided to leave was because I realized I had been a programmer analyst or variations on that role for about 5 years. And one of the leaders that I greatly respected in that business, when I told him about my plans to depart, said, "You're making a good move, Rob, because if you were to stay here, you'd get promoted up a level, or you'd be able to be a senior tech analyst or a lead, those kind of things. But you'd still, in essence, be a programmer analyst." And I thought about that for a long time and realized that he was right. I could develop within a sphere, but there were other passions I had and greater strengths that I had yet to discover that I never would have developed as fully had I remained on that track. So we're not saying that you can't stay in a job and love it. Like, I'm not advocating or saying that at all, because you might be a great marketing genius or a brilliant entrepreneur that is having spectacular success. But is that the only business that, you can be successful at? Or is that the only thing that, awaits you in terms of success in life? I like to think there are a multitude of opportunities. There are many paths that we could take. And sometimes we just have to get out of that tunnel vision and staying in our lane. Now, if you're a part of a large organization, the larger the organization, the more difficult it is to get outside of your lane, because job descriptions tend to rule the day. Now, there are a lot of companies that are being very innovative and very brilliant about not even using job descriptions. And there are varying degrees of freedom that we encounter, but any organization has team norms, unspoken rules, a culture that to some extent will tend to keep that inertia or keep us locked in our lane. So how do we break out of that? One of the ways I think that's most effective is to look at the problems that are being noodled on in the organization, or the festering pain points that nobody is doing anything about, and then maybe taking some initiative or taking a first step to proposing how to get that solved, or at least having conversations with coalition of the willing to say, is there something we can do about this? That by its very nature will get you outside of the typical job responsibilities that you are accountable to do. And you can't lose sight of those. You still have to do your job, but working on larger, more complex problems that are on your boss's plate, or that are affecting your stakeholder relationships or client satisfaction, is infinitely more fulfilling and will probably lead you out beyond your comfort zone. It'll get you into a place where there might be some risk and some uncertainty, but it will also be an exhilarating place where you get to test your limits and where you get to find, where you hit your stride. One of the first times I did that was in the tech support area of PeopleSoft. After I joined that business, I was enjoying the job, and I was actually helping a lot of customers and building good relationships with leaders throughout the company. And then I had my opportunity. It kind of landed on my plate unexpectedly to speak at a user conference about a product that was exceptionally buggy. And that was my first opportunity to get outside of my comfort zone and speak publicly to pretty large audience, which I had never really envisioned myself doing before. That led to a lot of other ventures where I tested my limits in other ways and got into other organizations where I could train and teach and get in front of groups. But it was that user conference that was a little outside of the norm of my job, but it was something that was really fulfilling and really opened up a whole lot of new opportunities for me as I went through my career at PeopleSoft. So when have you been forced to get out of your lane? Another time that I remember doing that, and this is after I'd made the move into education services, and I was at PeopleSoft University just trying to build courseware for our partners and for some of the internal groups, and we fell on hard times. The company had a slowdown as we got into, Y2K. There was a big lead up into that movement, and then all of a sudden, businesses all over the planet reduced their spend on IT and technical expenditures because that problem was solved. So when Y2K was in the rearview mirror, all of a sudden the spend dropped off and revenue became precious. Now at the time, I was not in a revenue generating position. I was developing internal training solutions and training for our business partners, which they would pay for. But the business partner training was a very small sliver of what my group did. So my team of internal consultants and instructors were building mostly for the consultants and for the developers and for people that we were hiring into PeopleSoft. And at the time when revenue became very, very light, I began to realize that one of the best things I could do for the company was to maybe figure out a way to get a new revenue stream opened up. And the way I envisioned that was really primarily through, brainstorming with the team. We started having meetings and talking about what can we do internally with our internal training solutions to maybe drive a revenue stream. And one of the ideas that came from one of my team members didn't come from me. They said, well, normally when we plan for major releases of the product, it takes 6 weeks after that release before we release training on that new product set. And this had been pretty much a hard and fast rule almost since the inception of PeopleSoft. It was just, we have the major release, 6 weeks later, the training environment gets built out and the classes then get tooled off of the new release. And so the idea came, what if we were to give some early release training to business partners? To people who would want to get their hands on the product, like to see and understand in a more granular level the features and functions that were coming and know how to make that viable for their constituents. And the idea had a lot of merit. And so the biggest hurdles that we were running up against, number one, the fact that the release wasn't final. It had to be in a state where it was final enough or it was solid enough where what it would look and feel like when the release came out would be similar to what the training would be. And the second hurdle, which was the more difficult one, was to convince the IT group to stage an interim training environment or a pre-release candidate training environment, which was risky and unsupported by the developers because it wasn't the final product that was going to go out the door. So after having a lot of leadership conversations with the development team and with IT, I finally got the ear of one of the directors of IT who said, I'd be willing to do this because the company really needs the revenue, but you and your team are going to be the ones that have to support the training environment. And so that required a little bit of a stretch, a little bit, more outside of my lane into the IT space, but I was willing to do it. And another member of my team who was very highly technical was going to join me in the support mechanisms for the environment that would allow that courseware to be developed. So it was kind of an experiment. It was an incubator experiment. It wasn't sanctioned from on high. So in other words, this is something we had to do as we carved out time from our other jobs to basically see if this was going to be viable. And fortunately for the team and I, we actually were able to stabilize the training environment and get that up and running pretty quickly. But more importantly, we were able to stage classes, courseware that was fascinating enough and interesting enough to the business partners where they were willing to come and attend the early release training. So this opened up a new revenue stream that had never, ever existed before, early release training. And this, of course, was not accessible to customers, but it was accessible to our business partners. And it was something that they were willing to pay for. So when I think about that experience, there were so many things that came out of it downstream. So yes, we did open up a new revenue stream. And yes, that did help actually pad some of the gap in the revenue. But the main benefit came in the innovation, breaking through the assumptions about the release and about the software that we needed to have all this time post-release to stabilize the training environment and to release, our courseware. We found that you could actually get a head start on that because you can incubate training environments that were approximate or very close to what the final release software would look like. And that saved a lot of runway in development and made it possible for training to be released pretty much within 2 or 3 weeks of the major software release, not 6 weeks after the fact. So we actually implemented this early release training as a forerunner to what eventually became codified into a process that allowed the company to innovate and release training sooner than it had ever been released before. So I like the fact that my team and I were able to set a precedent. We were able to set something in motion that was a pure incubation type experiment. It got us out of some of our daily grind work and some of the things that we had to do, but got us into a place that was valuable to the company, opening a revenue stream and also unleashing creative energy and innovation in a way that we had never, ever done it before. So these are the defining moments that really allow us to thrive and to grow in our career. It's getting out of our lane and having the courage to do that, knowing the risks, being eyes wide open, but stapling it to a big problem or knowing where the important hotspots were to operate in. Now, I think next time on the next version of the podcast, I think we're going to be talking about this one, which is a really big challenge for a lot of us in our careers. And this was also spoken about by Liz in her Impact Player book, guessing what my boss needs. And a lot of us do play these guessing games and we make assumptions, and that can set us back, or in some cases even lose us our jobs. So that's just a preview for next time. But I hope this is helpful to you as you think about your current situation, your work situation, and your job. Are you guilty of staying in your lane too much? Or are there opportunities? Is there a greater work you can do to solve bigger problems with the right coalition of people around you to enact growth, not just for you, but for them, and to achieve some great results that might not otherwise come to you were you to stay tethered to the job? So until next time, enjoy the journey.